Hello everyone, my name is Zachary Sanchez and I'm doing my presentation today for Modern Europe, taught by Professor Anne Miller. Today's subject is going to be about Vichy France and the involvement of the French Vichy during World War II. So brief history on what had happened before the invasion of France and before the Vichy state was given its power to coerce with the Germans. After World War I, Woodrow Wilson and the French Prime Minister Vichy and other leaders in Europe had hoped that the League of Nations would hold states accountable to prevent another war like World War I from happening. The signing at Versailles was, in essence, hopeful. There was a few stipulations towards the German states that would lead to World War II. The stipulations that had kept the German state at such a low point had coerced the polity to push for an urgence of nationalism again. As we've studied, nationalism has been the key in the founding of the modern state in many European nations. Nationalism is the key in understanding how Hitler was able to rise to power. There was a great inflation in the German state after World War I. There was coercion for the nations to actually collect German resources in order to pay for the war cost. And the German people were suffering from this. That's how Hitler was able to rise to power. And when Hitler rose to power, it was done legally. He became prime minister of the state and began militarizing the state once again. Mobilization was more than just adding numbers to the German army. It was also investment in the infrastructure as well as technology for the German army to use. So for example, tanks would no longer be these huge, cumbersome mechanical devices. They would be quick and fast in order to be used in what Hitler called a blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This would be a war that had never been waged in Europe, really in the history of the world. A war of advanced movements and quickness that would rival what had previous empires noticed or recorded. Now, in September 1939, when Poland was occupied or was invaded by Germany, the rest of Europe had not reacted in a way. They had hoped that this was a quick war, this is all that Germany wanted was Poland. Slowly, as the months progressed in the year 1939, state after state began to fall to the German state. And for that reason, by the time Germany wanted to invade France, the reaction from the Allies was only during that time. In June 1939, Hitler had planned to invade the French nation from the north. Now, by this time, Britain and France were able to mobilize their forces and create a defense along the Monod line, which was the border between Germany and France. Now, this was essentially a target that Hitler didn't want to deal with, a direct assault on the defense. Most military advisors advised that this would be a suicide for the German army, even though it had successes to previous states. But established nations like France and Britain had a greater army. So the plan was to actually invade the interior of France from the Ardennes Pass, or the Ardennes border, which was shared between Belgium and France. The best estimates by the German officers and engineers told Hitler that it couldn't be done in less than 9 days. However, due to the bureaucratic push by Hitler and the other Nazis, it was completed in 4 days. And Paris was occupied in less than a month. The French nation and the state itself had fallen, and officials who escaped Paris in that month to Bordeaux negotiated an armistice with Germany. Now, in the armistice, the agreement was that northern and most of eastern France would belong to an occupied German army, to whereas the rest of southern France, which was mostly agriculture, and there was a few port cities like Marseille, would be administered by a French government in the city of Vichy. That's why we notify this type of government as Vichy France, or the Vichy. Oftentimes these were called collaborators, or collabons in French. And there was still a little bit of resistance in France, in the north and the south, whether it was fighting against the collaborators or fighting against the Germans themselves. There was an essence of resistance, and a lot of espionage involved as well. The French government officials, however, did enact something that would reflect how xenophobic it was in comparison with Germany. Oftentimes, there were anti-Semitic laws that were in place in Vichy France that were harsher than the Nuremberg laws in Germany. Now, this wasn't even coerced by the Germans. The Germans essentially let Vichy France govern how it wanted to govern it. It wasn't even asking for its Jews. However, in northern occupied France, the Germans were looking for Jews. In total, there were 26 concentration camps in the part of France where Germany was occupied, and there were 15 concentration camps in Vichy-occupied territory. Altogether, though, about 75,000 Jews were actually deported from France to the eastern death camps and work camps. But what does that show? There was a population of 400,000 Jews in France at the time. Most of them were French Jewish, and there was a differentiation between French Jew and foreign Jew. The Vichy government had made this distinction and basically declared the patrie is where the French government is going to be reflected. So the French Jew is to be protected. However, the foreign Jew is to be moved away. And there is an emphasis amongst the militia groups called the milice to actually go and look for these types of Jews. Oftentimes, neighbor would rat out neighbor for whatever reason. And oftentimes, it was reflexive of how xenophobic France was, even the Vichy territories. We have to ask the question why. There are three main reasons. One was the memory of World War I. It was still fresh in the generation after World War I, and the quickness of Blitzkrieg had actually put an army within the interior of France, essentially to put up a defense by many, what was considered by many to be almost a losing battle. Resistance was taking place, but resistance was different than defending the nation if an army was outside the border or even just entering. And the second reason actually has to do with how religion played into the role, Catholicism specifically. Now, Pope Pius XII, who was Pope in charge during World War II, had a reaction to the Nazis doing its war crimes and also the invasion of the rest of Europe, and that reaction was solo. Pius himself did not actually advocate negativity towards the Germans. In fact, many Catholic officials had helped the Germans, either writing out Jews, writing out homosexuals, or communists, and even after the war had helped many German officers and other sympathizers escape to Argentina or other Latin American nations to avoid war crimes. Now, with Pius's reaction and many Catholic officials' reaction, the French people who were primarily Catholic, still having Catholic ties, though not as powerful as it was in previous generations, still had a sentiment to agree with these leaders. But even amongst the Catholic Church, there was division. For example, the Bishop of Toulouse had advocated that to attack Jews just for being a Jew is, an act against what the Church had officially taught. However, the bishop in a city only an hour away near Avion had actually advocated that cooperation to take out these Jews was a good thing. So even amongst religious leaders, that was an intolerance. And the third factor goes against nationalism, the patrie. What that is reflexive of is how France viewed its polity, that the patrie was from the soil up. It was loyalty to the nation and reflecting what French values were. And those French values were Catholicism, the French language, and even the battle of communism. Many had actually advocated it's better to have Hitler than Leblanc, who was a socialist leader that was gaining traction in the late 30s before Hitler had invaded into France. Now, with these cooperations, the collabos or the collaborators often had met stipulations. After the war and war crimes were being established, 10,000 collaborators were actually executed or imprisoned. Considering, though, that there was a lot of collaborations, it was government officials who had coerced that it was only through anti-Semitic action and collaborations with the Germans that the French people were to be protected. Many have advocated that this is, many modern historians have seen it in a different light, that there existed xenophobia prior to the French involvement with Germany. But leaders began to push these foreign Jews specifically out of the nation. Though France had a significantly higher rate of survival amongst its Jewish population, better than other nations, it did not distinguish that there were these carts and trains that had taken Jews to death camps were signed by Vichy French officials. Oftentimes it was done with the same stroke of a pen that would order shipments of food going to different regions, or just writing on tax collections in certain regions of France. It was done with the same pen by the same administrator. Oftentimes these administrators would count Jews going onto the car the same way they would count shipments coming into port cities or on different trade routes. Now, the involvement of Vichy France is specific to this cause that there almost continues to be an absence to this historiography. Yad Vashem, which is the collection database for Israel, actually documents the names of those who were able to survive the Holocaust in France and those who were actually involved. Many times these collabos were insulted in such a way that was a little different than what we would kind of expect. Oftentimes there was guilt by direct association and guilt by association per se. So for example, those who were guilty by association per se were often humiliated. So for example, women who slept with German officers, what would happen is many of their neighbors would actually shave the side of their head and parade them into the streets. And those who were directly involved often their property was destroyed, they were often sentenced to war crimes, and oftentimes some mobs would actually, in some instances, do justice for themselves. The involvement of Vichy France is often the point in which France doesn't really wish to be remembered for. But what is often remembered is the resistance and the helping of the Allies during D-Day and the rest of the war as progress of the war had come to an end. And oftentimes when German officers were retreating, the French people would actually celebrate this as well and welcome the Allies. This has been taken by different historians for different reasons. Oftentimes modern historiography sees this as the necessary evil, essentially, amongst the population. And these days, there is sort of coercion to start remembering the involvement of France during the Holocaust and World War II. It is for this reasons that we often have to look at the deeper aspects of what had happened in this nation during World War II, more than just the surface. We often have to look at what the population did involved-wise, either whether it was coercing it or continuing with the everyday business. It is for this reason I studied Vichy France. Thank you so much.